decided to get out and pursue this thing called project management or Scrum, something that was new at that time when I was getting out, at least new to me. I kind of feel like Forrest Gump of the Agile world because I get to work with some of the best in the world. I don't know how that happened, and it may just be luck, but I get to find myself around people like Gary Wong, who's on the call, Marion Keeley. We get Gareth Locke, Dave Snowden, Jeff Sutherland, and I'm not dropping names here, but it's just that kind of luck that I fell into. And then what I've done with my career is look back into it to identify those things that we can pull forward and transport into industry. And there's quite a few things out there from the military that you'll find in industry. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but just about anything we're doing in industry today is based off of work that was done in the military, including the Cynefin framework, by the way. So with that in mind, I've been coaching in a lot of great places, been working with some great folks down in Texas, get to work with the Cynefin network, which is amazing. Great group of folks out there that are really mentors to me, which is awesome. And then, like I said, I got to work with Dr. Sutherland on Scrum at Scale and his folks over there up in Boston. And then Nigel Thurlow, who's running a pretty good program down at Toyota Connected. So with that being said, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And, good evening to everybody in Africa. I tell you, I do have a special place in my heart for Africa because I did work in East Africa in the early, about 10 years ago, 11 or 8 years ago too. So East Africa, Djibouti, all the way down to Kenya, Tanzania. It's a large continent. And I'll tell you right now, most Americans believe it's just one giant state. So welcome. It's a great opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Brian. So let's go into this topic. Tell us a little bit about Weak Signal, and you can take it off from there.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story about September 11th, 2003. It's a Weak Signal story. So I get this call to, hey, it's Saturday morning. I got a great deal for you, Ponch. I want you to fly out to the USS George Washington. I want you to bag some traps, which is land on an aircraft carrier, which is really, really fun to do during the daytime. And then you can shoot out the front end, come back and land as many times as you want, and you'll be back in time for dinner. So I called my fiance at the time and I said, hey, listen, I'm going out to the GW and I'll be back in time for dinner. And she said, that's nice. What's the GW? So the GW is one of the largest aircraft carriers in our world. And this is a picture of the back end of my office that day. And I'm about to go out there and land. But let me give you some context to where I am in my career at this time. I'm at the top of my game. I've had 2 combat cruises. I've been in a squadron where we lost 2 friends, two squadron mates of mine actually crashed into the water as I was getting my mission commander call. I'm a Top Gun trained F-14 instructor, and I get to fly the F-14 demonstration. So when you think about all these awesome things that are going on around my world, I am at the top of my game as far as it goes to being an instructor and flying an aircraft. And the week before, I did something crazy during the air show. And the picture in the top left is from the actual air show where I'm about to propose to my now wife. We come back and land, and she said, of course, I think she had to because there were about 40 or 50,000 people in the audience. But this is part of the story that we could talk about maybe a little bit after today at a bar sometime. But there's a component in the story about the engagement. So let me tell you about where I was working at the time. The culture of an aircraft carrier, it's called a high reliability organization. And speaking up is in our culture. It's a psychologically safe environment where if we see something, we can say something. And for those of you who are not familiar with high reliability organizations, think about the FAA in the United States or the submarine community or the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. It's also known as a generative organization. And what a generative organization is, if you're familiar with DevOps, this is what DevOps is trying to create, where people are always looking for failure, you're mission focused, all your messengers are trained, and you're performance oriented. So this is the culture that we have on the flight deck of a carrier. Now let me give you a little background on the scenario. That day I'm flying with a senior pilot from our landing signal officer school. These are the guys that train the trainers that go out and fly with the new students and land on the back of the boat. So between the two of us, we have over 700 arrested landings on several different carriers. We have what is known as a fingertip feel for what we do. We can sense things that no others can. And on this day, we come into land, we come into the break, and we grab the 4-wire. And the 4-wire is not necessarily the best wire to grab, but we grabbed it because the 3 and the 2-wire were stripped. And I'm going to show you a video here in a moment where another aircraft comes in and lands and an accident happens. But as we land on the carrier, we both say in the cockpit to each other, something's not right. That felt weird. But because of our culture, we decide that we're going to go ahead and park the aircraft, open up the canopy, hand over our parts, and then have a discussion or a debrief about what we just saw. The problem with what we did, and I wouldn't say it's really a problem, is we didn't speak up to say, hey, boss, that felt weird. Instead, we went to go talk about it. Now, we sensed a weak signal, but we did nothing about it. And if anything happens afterwards, it's not our fault. We're part of the system, a large, complex, adaptive system. But let me show you what happens when you don't speak up in my world.
What you've just witnessed is a rare occurrence, but unforgettable for those who survive it. As this single-seat FA-18 Hornet traps, the arresting cable stretches to the breaking point. When it breaks, the plane quickly disappears over the side and into the water. Training saves the pilot, who ejects immediately. This yellow shirt miraculously jumps the cable as it whips under him, not once, but twice. Other well-trained crew members are not so lucky. As the cable snaps back at over 100 miles per hour, it takes out everything in its path. 7 crew members are injured. 3 in serious condition are immediately evacuated by helicopter.
Okay, so that's a bad day at our office, and things do get out of control pretty fast. But we do work and manage for resilience in carrier aviation. But the point behind that is, even in the most high reliability organization, even when you have the best environment for psychological safety, it doesn't mean you're always going to trap those errors. It doesn't mean you're never going to have an accident or you're never going to have a mishap. But we have to do something about that. So today, what I'm going to introduce to you is just a thing that we call Sense, Team, Act. And we're going to dive a little bit deep into Sense and Team, and we're not going to really step into Act. And then some of the things we'll talk about really come from complexity science. We may talk about some mapping techniques briefly. We'll get into a little bit of the iceberg of what an organization looks like, and some red teaming and complex facilitation techniques. We'll touch on them lightly. And we'll also hit on some the factors that limit performance, both organizational and human performance. A little bit on teaming and a little bit of red teaming. And I'll explain this as we go forward. But with that being said, I want to take a quick pause to make sure we have good comms between me and Anu, and if there's anything that I could do for anybody at the moment. Anu, how's everything sound?
Everything is perfect. Keep going.
All right. So the first thing I want to do is just pause and step back and talk about the OODA loop for a moment. And the OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, act. And I know a lot of people have different understanding of the OODA loop. I don't claim to be an expert on it. I'm pretty familiar with it. But this is the foundation of what is known as Scrum. Jeff Sutherland calls it the mindset of Scrum. You'll find it in agility. It's the backbone of the lean startup, the customer development model, which preceded the lean startup model. You'll find it in AI and ML, big data, in healthcare, safety, transportation, you name it. You will find the OODA loop just about anywhere. But one of the things about the OODA loop is it's not a simple loop, as you can see. And what we're going to focus on during today is really this section in here, and I'll dive into this in a moment. Generally, when you think about the OODA loop, people always say it's observe, orient, decide, act. And I say, well, that's kind of true. But what's more important are the linkages. All the linkages are much more important than the actual action steps. And I'll explain that as we go through this. So with that being said, I want to talk about sense making and the sense making section of the OODA loop, which is here. And what is sense making? The simplest way to explain sense making is how do we make sense of the world so we can act in it? If that's not familiar to you, sometimes you may have heard it as situational awareness, possibly shared consciousness. Sometimes people are known to have the bubble on what's going on. Collective mindfulness actually comes from the concept of high reliability organizations or high reliability organizing. Gary Klein talks about it as seeing what others don't see. And then John Boyd, when he drew out his OODA loop, he called it orientation. So I'm not saying these are all synonymous with sense making or they mean the same thing. It's just that sometimes you may hear about these, and what we're talking about is actually making sense of the environment so we can act in it. So orientation of the OODA loop is the Schwerpunkt. It's the most important aspect of the OODA loop. It's also known as the main priority or focus. And within it are several things that highlight us as humans. I call them barriers to human performance. Things like our culture, our genetic heritage, our previous experience, such as pattern recognition, new information, and analysis and synthesis. But really what I like to call them are the factors that limit human and organizational performance. They're all found inside the orientation part of the OODA loop. And our goal is to improve our orientation. And the way we do that is through improving implicit guidance and control, which is a inside out view. And then we also want to do something from the outside in, which is our feed forward. So what I'm going to do today is really focus on orientation for a few moments. We'll jump into how we can improve that orientation through implicit guidance and control. And then if we have time, we'll jump back into the feed forward mechanism, the outside in look for our sense making portion of this. Now, for those of you who are familiar with John Boyd and John Boyd's OODA loop, when he was about to name it the OODA loop, he thought about naming it the SODA loop for sense, orient, decide, act. So, for those that are online with Kinevin background, this is your sensing mechanism: sense, probe, probe, sense, respond, or sense, categorize, respond, so on and so forth. But for today, I just want to make sure everybody's aware that we're going to talk about a little bit about orientation and then ways to overcome some of those factors that limit performance. Okay, so let's talk about all of our systems first. When you look at these pictures up here, you may think, hey, these are all different things, right? We have accidents in the Gulf of Mexico. We have doctors leaving surgical tools inside of humans. Space shuttles blow up every now and then. Companies go out of sale or go out of business. Volkswagen does crazy things every now and then, and ships run into each other at sea. Most people will say, well, that's different. That's not what we do. And the truth of the matter is, all we are self-similar organizations. We're people working together in teams with technology. So from software development to patient safety, to driving a ship at sea, to flying an aircraft in the air, think of it this way. We're just socio-technical systems. We're complex adaptive systems. But what gives organizations the next generation edge today is not doing Scrum or going through scaled agile framework or things like that. What gives organizations the edge are really non-technical skills, the soft skills, the teamwork skills. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is we need to work together as teams to improve our orientation so we can make sense of our environment. So what are some of the factors that block individual teams and organizations from detecting and acting on weak signals? Well, one of the first ones is our hierarchical organizations. In a hierarchy, we usually push things down from leadership on down to everything. But down at the bottom, we have flow going this way. That means value and information flow around the system through our teams. But as you can see from the image up there, that's not the way we manage. And the problem with the way we manage is in a hierarchical operating system, we operate in silos. And what that means is when you try to communicate across silos, it's ineffective and slow. And then same with information. Now, I've been told, I've never been the CEO of a company, and some of you online have been, but I've been told as a CEO, there's only two things that you can count on when you're at the top. And that is you're never going to get a bad meal, and you're never going to be told the truth. So I think that's what leaders are getting these days. They never get a bad meal, and they never get told the truth. So those lower at the pecking order, down at the bottom of this image, are less likely to speak up in this type of organization. And we also know that value is delayed. So I think this is the way the reductionist approach to management has driven us to work as organizations. And right now it's ineffective for many of the things we need to do. So that's our number one limitation with a organization. Moving away from the organization, I want to get down to the human level. And humans, we have ego and fear. And you can see, I'm not going to read that to you, but I do want you to pause and ask yourself, what's wrong with this image? Can anybody see what's wrong with the image? And you can speak up, or you can just throw something online there.
If you're speaking, you have to unmute yourself first.
Okay, I'm going to ask Gary Wong. What are you seeing there, Gary? I don't know if Gary's still there. Gary, you're muted.
All right, I'm unmuted. What do I see? Is that guy? I guess he's belted in, is he not? I can't tell.
He's built it in. So here's this former aviator, astronaut in space. It's probably the most frightful thing you can do is walk in space, according to astronauts who've landed on aircraft carriers, by the way. But even at this level, we still make mistakes. And this mistake is really simple. Take a look at his boots. They're on the wrong feet. So the bottom line here is we're all human. We all make mistakes. But we got to admit those mistakes in front of others. So I just think this is a great image to kind of show that, hey, even when we're at the top of our game, sometimes we walk out the door with our boots on the wrong feet. We're human. Now, speaking of human and our brains, if you look at how much your brain burns as far as energy, it's about 20%, but it only weighs 2% of your body weight. And what's going on in our brains is our brains are always trying to take shortcuts. They're trying to be really, really efficient. And in fact, it's known that laziness is built deep into our system. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. We can actually leverage it to our advantage. And I'll get to that in a moment. And there's a concept out there about system one and system two thinking. System one thinking is more of the intuitive, vertical, single loop type of thinking we do, where it's really, really fast thinking. Just basically reacting to things. When you see something, you can react to it and you know what to apply. But over here, the advantage to system one is we can use biases, heuristics, repertoire, mental models, and schema. The disadvantage is the same thing. Biases, heuristics, repertoire, mental models, and schema. If our mental models are wrong, if our heuristics are wrong, if our biases are wrong, and we don't know about them, then that's going to reduce our ability to orient to the environment. And you'll see some of these come up here in a few moments. System two, on the other hand, is about slowing down our thinking. So it's where we get the novel receptors involved with all this. So think about telling a story backwards. It's harder to tell a story backwards than it is forward. And it kind of slows you down a little bit. So it's harder to lie when you go backwards. Don't tell your kids that. It's a practice. But that's what police officers will do sometimes, is have you maybe draw and tell a story backwards so they can hear the truth of what's coming out. But there are other things that we can get out of system two. Remember, our brains are always trying to be efficient. They're always trying to save energy. And system two is going to take a lot of energy. So we want to try to get there every now and again. We do know about the brain as being is a sequential processor. It's unable to pay attention to two things at the same time. In aviation, when we started flying 20 years ago, when I started flying 20 years ago, we learned that we can't multitask. It was never a thing to us. We can task switch, but we can't multitask, if that makes sense. And for those of you in the Agile space and using Scrum, I know you talk about this all the time, but the truth is you cannot multitask. You're susceptible to 50% more errors. It takes longer to accomplish your task, and I believe we actually get dumber when we multitask. So the more devices we put in front of our children, the more things we do, the more you switch day to day, it's actually making us dumber. So, think about that. One last thing about our brains, we're better at seeing patterns and abstraction than recording detail. And what this means is in our brains, we don't take pictures, there aren't any pictures in our brains. Our brain really puts things together through patterns and pattern recognition. So don't think of us as a computer or a data processor. We're not like that. That's not the way our human brain works. So the point behind all this, I just want to give you some cognitive science behind what's going on with our brains, because that makes us human. And in fact, that leads me to the first thing we need to talk about, one of the first factors that limit human and organizational performance, and that's cognitive biases. Now, there are plenty of cognitive biases out there, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I do want you to experience one or two today. And the first one we're going to look at is something called functional fixedness. And the concept here is if you take a candle, some matches, and a box of tacks, and you put them in front of people in this order, and you ask them to fix the candle to the wall somehow so the wax doesn't drip onto the table with this image, people have a really difficult time in doing that. And because they're looking at the function of the box, not the feature of the box. It isn't until you take the tacks out of the box that you can now see the feature of the box of being able to hold the candle up somehow. And the solution to this is you use the box feature, the feature of the box to hold the candle, use the tacks to tack it to the wall, and light the candle. So this is known as functional fixedness. There's another concept out there called exaptation. And I'll talk to that here for a moment. Exaptation is about you have features of something that developed feathers, like a dinosaur had thousands of years ago. They had feathers, and in trees, those dinosaurs that were in trees and they fell out of the trees, those feathers were really to keep them warm, but they had features that allowed them to fly. So if you remember going back a few minutes ago where I was talking about how we look at different industries, different organizations, ship driving, flying an aircraft, surgical teams as being different, the truth is they have things that were designed for a specific function, but have features that can do things for you. And in my case, in aviation, we have something known as aviation crew resource management, which is known as human factors, which builds high-performing teams. And those type of things are transportable. So the bottom line here is, with our cognitive biases, if we can overcome them, we can start to see things in other domains that can be applied to what we're doing right now. So that's the Dunker's candle problem, which is about 80 or 90 years old. You can look that one up and mess around with it. Something else out there is something known as inattentional blindness. And the concept is really simple. And I'll play a game with you here in a moment. But if you were given this X-ray, if you will, and asked to do a nodule detection task like these 24 radiologists were, what they had in here was a picture of a gorilla that was 48 times larger than a cancer nodule. And only 83% of the radiologists, who are subject matter experts in what they do, they're the type of people that are scanning this all the time, they did not see it. 17% of those radiologists did. And they saw this gorilla up in this corner here, for example. Now here's the scary thing. Even though the 83% say they didn't see it, eye tracking software showed that they actually did, that they scanned right over it. And the point here is, you do not see what you do not expect to see. It's something known as inattentional blindness. And I'm going to play a game with you here in a moment. So hopefully everybody has a pretty good connection. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to the first approach to overcome these biases, especially in group work. And it's called Think, Write, Share. And this is what we get from a red teaming school down in Leavenworth, Kansas. And Think, Write, Share is really simple. And it's actually a shallow dive into chaos, which I'll get to here in a moment. but you think about what you're going to talk about. You think about it, you write it down, and then you share it out. Most people do it the other way. They start sharing things out, maybe writing it down, and then thinking about it. What we're trying to do here is kind of isolate people from each other. Even though they're in the same room, you can use a sticky note, if you will, like this. Go ahead and write down your idea, and then we'll share them out some way. And I'll show you how to do that here in a moment. So with that in mind, I know you can't communicate with each other that well right now, which is okay. But I'm going to show you a video here in a moment where we can practice this, and you can take this and show your people in your organization. And what this is really a shallow dive into chaos. And when we talk about complexity theory, we use a lot of work in chaos to remove any constraints around people. And I'll use people for an example. And the concept is really simple. Back in 1968, we had a submarine that went lost between the Azores and here in Norfolk, Virginia. And the way we found it was we knew it was in a 300 nautical mile area, a 300 nautical mile box, if you will, but we just couldn't figure out where it was. So a Navy captain asked some experts to get together, and he isolated them, and he asked them to have them give an estimate of where they think the submarine would be found. None of those estimates were accurate, but when they took the average of all those estimates, what they discovered was the submarine was about 220 yards from where the average estimate was. And what we're doing here is we're isolating people, just like we do with Think, Write, Share. And for those of you that do planning poker with Scrum, it's the same concept. You don't want people to see the card that you have until it's time to share it out. So you isolate people, you take a shallow dive into chaos, and that's how we can use chaos to our advantage. Now, I know this is kind of jumping around a little bit, but I want to make some connections here that when you go to a class and you hear somebody say, this is the way you need to do it, the point behind all this is the way you need to do things is they have to be supported by sound theory, or they just don't scale, or people are teaching them incorrectly. So everything we coach at AGLX is supported by sound theory, and we use it from ideation to planning poker to sense making. So I'm about to play a video for you, and I want you to use the Think, Write, Share method real fast. It's about a 2-minute long video. Pay attention to the first minute. Go ahead and write down those things that you think you notice, and then we'll see what you see.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Okay, as you saw in there, 21 things changed, and I guarantee you in the first minute that you watched it, you didn't see any of those changes. Am I correct? Or maybe some of you noticed some small things out there. We do this down with the folks down in Toyota. We saw the same thing. Very few people saw it. Maybe 5-10% saw something change, but they weren't really sure. And I did this yesterday with some folks up here in Norfolk, and the same thing. They just didn't see what was changing in front of them. Now, this goes back to the inattentional blindness. We do not see what we do not intend to see. If I told you to pay attention to things that are changing all over the place, if I primed you in a way, if I gave you some type of cognitive trigger, you would have seen some more things. And that's the power of some storytelling, which we're not going to get into much today, but there's a lot of capability in the way we prime people up, either through ritual like like briefing, scrubbing up, or putting on a flight suit to go fly. So that capability is there. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. Everybody still see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So any interruptions on the screen? Because I'm showing one right now. No?
No.
Yes, there is a
Okay.
pop-up asking if you want to connect your iPhone or iPad to this computer.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Let me fix that real fast, and I'll get back to you.
Now we see you.
You see me? All right.
Yes.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay. Let me get back here and jumped around on me. All right. So there are things we can do to help us see what's right in front of us, how we can mitigate cognitive biases, how we can improve critical thinking. Now, I gave you Think, Write, Share. I think that's the most important capability you can have. There are books out there. There are free books out there on liberating structures. I do recommend taking a look at red teaming techniques, which are based off of liberating structures. And they're free. You can download them online. But Think, Write, Share is probably the baseline approach that every organization needs to get through mitigating cognitive biases. Now, red teaming, I brought this up several times. What is it? It's really about a way to mitigate cognitive biases, groupthink mitigation tools, if you will, critical thinking approaches, which I'll talk about a few of those here in a moment. And there's really two other capabilities inside red teaming, including personal assessment, self-awareness, and then something known as cultural empathy. We won't talk about those today, but there are, like I said, trying to look into red teaming. Please do look into red teaming for your advantage. So I'm just going to give you a few for the applied critical thinking approaches out there and the groupthink mitigation tools. Think, Write, Share, one of the best tools out there. One of the liberating structures is 1, 2, 4, all. Like I said, you can look this up online. And then I think the leading approach for critical thinking at the moment is something known as a Wordly map. And I know we have some folks online that use it quite a bit, but what I'm seeing with that is it's really building up a lot of that orientation or situational awareness that we have. I see we're doing this again. I'll get back to you guys. I'm still here. So a lot of great capabilities that are out there that are free, and I really recommend you take a look at them. I'm bringing it back up. All right, cool. There we go. Pre-mortems, fantastic way to look at things. Always asking about how is this thing going to fail in the future, your plan. Fish bowls, another way to get great information from your customers. But anyway, the point behind all this is there are a lot of great capabilities that are online for free, and they all require Think, Write, Share, if you will. Okay, we have a few minutes left before we want to get into question and answers. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the outside in look for our sense-making capabilities. We just finished up some of these things in here, improving our implicit guidance control for seeing from the inside out. But now we want to talk about outside in, the way we go and look at an organization. So first things first, work as imagined. Work as imagined. When you're looking at a system or an organization and you start asking them questions with traditional surveys, questionnaires or assessments, they're going to tell you these things here. Yes, we follow this procedure. Yes, these are our values. Yes, this is our vision if we know it. Here's our strategy if they happen to know it. And my favorite one right now is, hey, we're agile because we do Scrum. Therefore, we're doing Scrum. You know, we are going to tell you what you're going to ask us. So this is what we call work as imagined, and this is also where we get a lot of the big data. And unfortunately, if you look back to what we just talked about and some of the biases that are out there, you'd have to question the validity of the data that we're collecting from this approach. And there's a lot more depth to that too. So what we say we do, also known as work as imagined, is generally what we get through surveys, bias surveys, from facilitation bias. Survey fatigue plays into all this as well. We're going to skip the middle part for now. We may come back to that. But down at the bottom, down underneath is where we get the truth. We get to know why do we do what we do, which is also known as work is done. And these are really captured through micro stories or micro narratives that we get around the water cooler. And yesterday we had the same conversation about this here in Norfolk, Virginia, about how do we get to leading indicators for accidents or mishaps. And we really dove into this and said, hey, we got to get down to the leading indicators from those water cooler conversations that the people in our organization are having. It's too late to go back and ask them about their vision, strategy, policy, procedures during an assessment. And there's other reasons why that doesn't work that well. So we have to find ways to get to this and improve our orientation. And right now in the US anyway, and I think Canada and then the folks in the UK, New Zealand and elsewhere, they're further advanced than we are in the US as far as learning how to capture this data. And that's what we're working on right now with some large organizations, and many of the folks online are working on this, and they can speak to it more here in a moment. But anyway, the way we improve our feed-forward mechanism is not through surveys and assessments. It's really from collecting stories, and it's a shift in thinking. It really is. So with that being said, I want to leave some time up for questions. And I know we have a lot of experts out there, so I want to include them in the conversation. But with that being said, where can we start with some questions?